I'm very much happy to see some familiar faces. There are some people whom I was with at high school. This is a small city, Bulawayo. There are some former students of mine, and there are some students and also some colleagues. I'm very much privileged to be here. I was asked to talk about tracing the dynamics of misinformation and disinformation in Zimbabwe. So this is the topic that I was given. I will try not to be too, sometimes the challenge of being a lecturer, you end up theorizing a lot, even when it's not necessary. So I will try to be as simple as possible as we talk about this issue. The issue of fake news is something that is, fake news has become really a buzzword. A lot of people are talking about fake news. We're talking about misinformation, disinformation, and sometimes we tend to use these words interchangeable. So it is very, very important for us to look at this issue to explain what we mean by fake news, what we mean by misinformation, what we mean by disinformation, and then also contextualize these debates within the Zimbabwean context. So in my presentation, I will look at three key issues which I'm going to focus on. The first one, I'm going to look at the digital transformations in journalism practice and the media in general. What it entails, what have been the implications of this digital transformation in terms of the production, dissemination, and consumption of news. It's very, very important for us to understand that in order for us to understand the issue of fake news, the stage of fake news, we need to have an appreciation of how it is intertwined with the advent, with the proliferation of social media networks. And then secondly, I'm going to try to unpack these complex terms, fake news, misinformation, disinformation. What do we mean by fake news? What do we mean by misinformation? What do we mean by disinformation? What is the difference between misinformation and disinformation? I think it's very, very important for us to understand what these terms mean. And then lastly, I'm going to look at this issue of misinformation, disinformation within the Zimbabwean context, which is actually what I'm supposed to look at as I trace the dynamics and complexities of misinformation and disinformation in Zimbabwe. So what we need to understand is that there is a strong belief that the phenomenon of fake news is slowly intruding on virtually every aspect of life. This is something that has been said by one scholar called Ogola. They argue that the idea of fake news has gained a lot of scholarly attention, but at the same time, this term fake news remains confusing because it can be used by different people for different purposes. We can all accuse each other of peddling fake news. So the idea of fake news becomes what some people call a floating signifier, in the sense that different people, different individuals, different even politicians, they start using this term fake news actually to undermine other contrary opinions. So let me talk about the digital transformation of the news media. So digital technologies are actually transforming journalism practice. I think this is something that we can all agree, that the production, dissemination, and consumption of news has significantly been shaped by digital technologies. So due to these digital platforms, such as news websites, Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, the process of disseminating news has become more rapid and easy. So it's now easy for ordinary people to access news. It's now easy for ordinary people to share news as a result of these digital technologies. At the same time, journalism practice is no longer a monopoly of traditional journalists, really. Journalism is no longer a monopoly. There has been what some people call a destabilization of the hierarchy. the hierarchy of news production, the hierarchy of news dissemination in terms of who has got the authority to be producing, to be disseminating news. This has significantly shifted as a result of these digital technologies. It's no longer traditional journalists who are the sole, who have got the monopoly over news production, but any person can now produce news. Any person can now disseminate information. I think people are now talking about the role of citizen journalists. They are now talking about individuals, some who are not trained to be journalists, but at the same time they are producing, they are disseminating information, which sometimes it constitutes news, sometimes it's regarded as false information. So what we are saying is that social media tools, they are significantly increasingly shaping the process of producing and disseminating news. So as a result, the relationship between audiences and news organizations have significantly shifted due to these technological transformations, because ordinary citizens, they are now co-producers and distributors of news content. At the same time, these digital technologies, they are actually promoting democracy. There is an argument that digital technologies are promoting democracy. I think we can, we know about all these movements, hashtag movements, whether we're talking about this flag, we're talking about Zim Lives Matter, we're talking about Fees Must Fall, we're talking about Black Lives Matter. All these technologies, actually, they are enabling citizens or ordinary people to actually challenge dominant worldviews, to actually challenge those who are in power. But the negative implications with these digital technologies, in as much as they are promoting or in as much as they are deepening democracy, the negative implications have been the proliferation of fake news, the proliferation of hate speech, flaming, cyberbullying. All these have become the negative implications. But now for today, I just want us to focus on the issue of fake news, which is the second issue that I'm now going to talk about. It's fake news. So what is fake news? What is misinformation? What is disinformation? So I just want us to look at all these, the conceptual debates surrounding these terms. There are people who are arguing that now we're living in what they call post-truth times. The idea of post-truth, they are saying that objective facts, what we regard as facts, is no longer influential in shaping public opinion. It's now more to do with appeals to emotion. It's now more to do with personal beliefs. It's no longer about objective facts. So this is what they say, that we're now living in a post-truth world. So what really is fake news? What is fake news? I think it's a term that most of us were always using, that this is fake news. But what exactly is fake news? A few days ago, there was a message that was disseminated online. It was about it was the logo of the Herald was used. Is it the logo? Yeah, the institutional logo of the Herald was used to actually send a message that that most people, most Zimbabweans, or most people from Ndebele who run to South Africa, who go to South Africa, are actually criminals in Zimbabwe. So this message was, it's fake news, it was false, it's false content, but it was now appropriated by some people, on his Twitter page. I assume it's his original Twitter page. He tweeted something and he used that information to actually endorse, to actually justify these xenophobic tendencies. He was saying that these people who are in South Africa, they are actually criminals in Zimbabwe. They are actually criminals. So you see the dangers of fake news, that it has got some implications in the sense that it can be used to actually promote, to sow divisions and to promote confusion, to spread xenophobic tendencies, to spread racism or tribalism. So this is just an example of the negative implications of fake news. So what exactly is fake news? Someone defines fake news as news articles that are intentionally and verifiable false and could mislead readers. So we're talking about the deliberate dissemination of false information. So this information is false and is deliberately disseminated with an intention to misinform. This is how I can define fake news. And there is a definition which is from a paper that was written by Admama Rehezma Boyazara and Dumsani Moyo. They say that fake news is the deliberate production and sharing of misleading and false information with the sole purpose of intentionally gaining political, economic, and ideological points. So we're saying that this information is false. It's being produced, it's being created and disseminated with an intention to mislead audiences or to mislead readers. This is how we can simplify the issue of fake news. So someone can ask a question: what motivates this production and dissemination of fake news in general? There are some people who are saying that there are financial reasons. There are economic incentives for the production of fake news that is linked to what some call digital capitalism, that there are always benefits. The more people click on fake news, the more people read those fake stories, there are actually economic benefits for the people who are actually creating fake news. And secondly, there is the political reason, the ideological reason that people sometimes produce fake news or disseminate fake news to actually discredit people who have got different political viewpoints. So, but there are some dynamics or complexities with the naming of fake news. There are some people who are saying that fake news, the idea of fake news is problematic. They are saying it's problematic. Why are they saying it's problematic? There is Whiteley and Derakam argue that it's more useful to use terms such as information disorders, because the idea of fake news is now become so contested, it has become so confusing that people no longer are sure what fake news entails. So what is the problem with fake news? What's the problem with the name or with the phrase fake news? I'm just going to list 2 or 3, and then we'll then look at misinformation and disinformation. The first one, some scholars argue that the phrase fake news is now inherently vulnerable to being politicized and deployed as a weapon against the news industry. This is common. This is what happened, I think, in 2016 in the United States of America, where Donald Trump was actually using the term fake news to label the mainstream media. So fake news can actually be used. It can be politicized by those who are in power to actually label views that are contrary to their own beliefs. So anyone can be accused of peddling fake news. This is what people are saying. The other challenge really is, this is related to what scholars such as Farkas and Shaw argue, that fake news has become a floating signifier. What do they mean by fake news as a floating signifier? They are saying fake news has become a political concept that can be used to delegitimate political opponents and construct hegemony. I think you can think of ways in which fake news has become a mechanism where the powerful can clamp down upon or restrict or undermine free press. So under the pretext of regulating the scourge of fake news, authoritarian governments can actually criminalize free speech. This is what has been regarded as problematic with the naming of something as fake news. I think you are aware that in some countries there have been state-ordered internet shutdowns. I think in Zimbabwe there was something like that. Was it in 2019? I think there was something like that also happened in Sudan, the DRC, where the internet was shut down, and the justification was they wanted to deal with fake news. So this is what we're saying, that fake news, the phrase fake news can be appropriated by politicians around the world to label those who are challenging their own viewpoints. So since we are saying that fake news is related even to cyber propaganda, there are some people who are now saying that it's more useful to use misinformation and disinformation. I think this is why maybe this is the topic I was given, that I should focus on misinformation and disinformation. Since the idea of fake news, sometimes it can be very challenging. So what is misinformation? So let me distinguish between misinformation and disinformation, because these two terms can be used interchangeably. So misinformation is unknowingly circulating or sharing false information. I think most of us are guilty of this one. Huh? Misinformation. Social media, you receive something, juicy news, something that you think is very interesting. You don't even verify, you send it to your to groups, whether it's family groups or groups of your friends or colleagues, you just circulate. It's unknowingly circulating and sharing false. You don't know that is false news. You assume that is something that is genuine, right? And then you circulate it, you share it. So this information is shared, but no harm is intended. You don't have ulterior motives. You don't have malicious intentions in circulating this false information. It's false information, but there is no harm intended. And you receive this information, you circulate it. This is what we call misinformation. So the content is believed to be true, and then what is disinformation? So disinformation is deliberately creating and sharing false content. So that's the difference between misinformation and disinformation. There is the intention. So with misinformation, you unknowingly circulate that information. You don't know that is false. With disinformation, you are aware that what you have created or what you are circulating is false information, and you circulate it. So it's the deliberate creation and circulation of content known to be false. So you see, there is a relation between misinformation and disinformation, but there's also a difference. Some people have gone on to create what they call the classification of misinformation and disinformation. They try to classify it. The first one is what they call false connection. So when we're talking about misinformation and disinformation, there is what we call false connection. So with false connection, look, just think of the headlines or the visuals or the captions that appear in a particular story, but that headline does not support the story, or those visuals do not support the story that is there. I've seen some, even on Facebook, some people have been complaining and actually accusing some news organization that remove my picture in your story. Maybe there is a story about a certain issue, and then your picture is added to that story, which has got nothing to do with that particular story. This is what we call false connection. And then the second one is false context, which this is very common, especially, for instance, photographs. Images can be disarticulated from their original context and then rearticulated to another context. For instance, there is a paper that was written by Shepard Ndlovu and is it Barnabas, They were looking at xenophobic images. They were saying, it was in 2016, they were saying that images from 2008, they were used, they were being circulated as if they were images of these xenophobic attacks that were taking place in 2016. So it's possible that images even from other countries, African countries or somewhere, even of violence, they can be used in the current environment to actually project a narrative that there is violence that is taking place in a particular village. So this is what we mean by false context. And then there is also what they call imposter content. Imposter content is whereby a journalist's byline or a logo of a particular news organization is being used in a story that news organization is not part of. I think the example that I gave earlier on is what is regarded as imposter content. I think we've got journalists here, so just imagine your name is written, appears on a story that you did not write. So it becomes imposter content in the sense that the creators of that particular story, they want to endorse their narrative and they use your name to actually endorse that particular narrative. Let me look at the last aspect, which is the dynamics of information disorders in Zimbabwe, or the dynamics or complexities of misinformation, disinformation, and fake news, whatever you may call it, in Zimbabwe. I just want to focus on the examples within Zimbabwe. Now that I've looked at the conceptual issues, now that we are aware of what we mean by fake news, the challenges of fake news, what is misinformation and disinformation. So what are these dynamics and complexities? I think what we need to understand about fake news or misinformation or disinformation is that it predates the era of digital media. In as much as it is connected with digital media, in as much as it is connected with online platforms, but it was there before the advent of Twitter. There was fake news before the advent of Twitter. There was misinformation, disinformation before the advent of WhatsApp, before the advent of online websites. In as much as it is intertwined, in as much as it is deeply connected with online media, but it existed prior to the advent of online media. During the colonial era, fake news manifested as propaganda. Yeah, this is what a number of scholars have mentioned, such as Admamare, Hezma Boyazara, and Dumsani Moe. They look at, when they are tracing this issue, they are saying in the colonial era, fake news or propaganda was being deployed by the Rhodesian government to actually spread false content, to spread false information for their own ideological purposes. And then as we move on to the post-colonial era, there is also an argument that this is actually huge, and I would like to quote this Admamare, Hezma Boyazara, and Dumsani Moyo. They argue that in some countries, the state can become the main producer of fake news. The state can become the main producer of fake news through the use of state-controlled media. The state can actually be channeling information that is false. If we were to look at fake news as propaganda, from that angle of fake news as propaganda, there is an argument that the state can become the main producers of fake news. The other issue, if you remember in 2002, there was a story that was published by the Daily News about the Magunje woman. I think it's a very common story. The Magunje woman who was beheaded, 2002. Myself and my brother, there's Busise Dube, were Form 4, high school. Yeah, 2002 at North Lee. So this is when this story was being published, that there was a woman who was beheaded at Magunje. but it was later discovered that it was fake news. So I just want to show you that fake news was not really, it has never been really linked to online news, but it has always been there. And also that it's also related to the politics. So the other issue surrounding the dynamics of fake news is that fake news, it can be weaponized by political parties. I think this is something that we are aware of in Zimbabwe, that fake news has been weaponized by political parties. There are some papers that have been published. I think one of them is by Lighton Mube on digital propaganda, or cyberbullying. And also Dumsani Moyo wrote something about in the run-up to the 2018 elections, there were all these cyberbullying online warriors. You know about them, the Barakashi, terrorists. Some they call them trolls. It's how fake news was manifesting itself as digital propaganda, whereby even false information, whereby even images of rallies, doctored images of rallies that were not even, maybe rallies in South Africa, they are shared as if they are rallies of a political party in Zimbabwe. This is how fake news was being disseminated. And then in 2020, I think you are aware of the incident related to, is it Love More Zogusekwa, who was arrested for allegedly peddling fake news. I think there was a law that was used. Is it the Criminal Law and Codification and Reform Act that was used for charging Zogusekwa? In this, the assumption, the charge was that he had created and disseminated fake news about COVID-19. So what are the other examples of fake news or false information that we know of? I think most of them, they've been related to COVID-19. I think you are aware of false information about COVID-19 related deaths of prominent figures that we have received from our phones. We have received information that so and so has died. And then we discover that no, this is actually not true. This is actually false news. Even before the issue of fake news, I think there was so much information about the death of the late former president that was being circulated, that he had died, I think for even 2014, 2013, there was a lot of information we were receiving, whether we're talking about bogus websites, we're talking about WhatsApp, there was all this information. These are the examples of fake news. The other examples is to do with RPZ introducing higher denomination of bond notes. We have always received information, and then there will be some images of the new bond note, and then people will be asking themselves some question: is there a new bond note that has been printed? And then later on you realize that is false news. The other issues is to do with adverts in terms of jobs. At one time there was an advert about nursing recruitment. I think was it at Mpilo. People went there to Mpilo Hospital assuming that there was a recruitment, and then later on it was discovered that it was a lie. Someone deliberately created that false information and started circulating it, and most of us didn't know that it was false news. We're sharing with our relatives that no, there's recruitment, go to Mpilo Hospital, go, and then you go there and you realize that it's fake news. The other issue is, I think I've talked about that Herald incident, right? I'm happy that we have got news organizations that are active in actually correcting such errors. In a WhatsApp group where I was, someone responded that no, this is fake news. There's nothing like that. I think the other fake news is to do with ZBC online. I think you have seen some funny stories attributed to ZBC online, and then you know that no, there's something wrong here. This is not correct information. I'm about to wrap up now. So in terms of, I just want to maybe link fake news a bit with media and information literacy, I won't dwell much on this aspect because there's a lot that is going to be covered soon. I think we are all aware that WhatsApp, I think even studies that have been done, they indicate that WhatsApp is the most popular social network in Zimbabwe and is followed by Facebook. According to a study that was conducted by MISA, WhatsApp contributes to over 44% of all mobile internet usage in the country. This was a study that was conducted in 2020. So most people are actually using WhatsApp, whether we're talking about sharing information or receiving news. People are using WhatsApp to actually share information and also receive news. So mobile cell phones, they are also the primary mode of communication. Although in most parts, maybe in some parts of Ndebele land, there is always a network. The network coverage tends to be poor. There is poor network connectivity. I think there are some studies that have been done that indicate, that explain this issue, that in some parts of Ndebele there are some poor network connectivity. In Mat North, there was a study that was done by Chingara and others in 2020, which was looking at areas such as Cholocho, Nkai, that there are all these struggles with network connectivity. But I know that it's not just in those areas, but even in other parts of the country, in rural areas. If we were to look at the rural areas, some of the challenges, especially in areas even where I come from, in Mat South, when we are looking at the role of the mainstream media, even if we were to talk about ZBC, people are not really able to listen to ZBC radio stations or watch ZBC television in some parts of the rural areas in Ndebele and South. So this has got implications on issues to do with misinformation. For instance, let's say you are in a WhatsApp group in the rural area and you receive news, which is actually fake news, and you don't have access to what we call credible news sources, right? If we are to talk about mainstream news, whether we're talking about ZBC, we're talking about the Sunday News, the Herald Chronicle, I think the hard copies, they don't really reach the urban areas. So the rural areas in my village, those hard copies are not really distributed to the rural areas. So if you are using WhatsApp and you are a member of a WhatsApp group and you receive this information, whether it's false content, and you do not have credible sources of news, it means that you are vulnerable to this fake news, right? Because you do not have credible sources of news. So, of course, now there are efforts in terms of community radio stations, which are, I think, it's a good effort in actually ensuring that people have got access to credible news in some parts of the country. I think there is a radio station, is it in Tepe, Manama? I think there is another one in Plumtree and other which have been licensed. So this is actually something that is positive. And I would, in conclusion, I would also like to acknowledge the role of different news, of different organizations that are involved in actually training and in actually addressing this issue of fake news and media information and literacy. Organizations such as SITE, organizations such as ZimFact, I think they've done some work, and also Interlink Academy, I think they are doing a lot of work in actually ensuring that people are able to be equipped in terms of media literacy. So as I conclude, I think fake news is really a problem, as I've indicated. And in as much as there are all these debates in terms of what fake news is and how fake news can, the phrase fake news or the concept of fake news can be misused and abused by political actors for their own hegemonic purposes. We need to be able to address these challenges of misinformation and disinformation. And I'm happy that there are all these efforts that are being done by different organizations to ensure that people are literate, to ensure that people are able to distinguish between real news and fake news.